I see this little metal tube sticking out of the ground, and so I'm like, what is that? I've never seen that before.
Never. I had no clue what it was. None whatsoever. Didn't know that it existed.
I was really taken back that something like this was in our community. Number one, that I didn't know a thing about it or how to handle it if it did discharge.
My dad says, get in the shower now. He calls the police. The police pull up, then the hazmats, then the firemen.
He said, they're poisoned, get the dogs.
There's the whole 9 yards. Only thing missing is the cyanide capsule.
No reassurance, no directives, no writing on paper is going to make these devices safe.
This is real. It can't be denied. It's not fake news. And it's the tip of the iceberg of what this agency is doing.
Who on earth could go and put a cyanide bomb next to my house, whether it be on public or private land, and not be charged with a felony? Not be charged with anything? Who could get away with that?
Here's Canyon and Casey jumping on the tramp in the rain.
Like any other day, I wanted to go outside and explore with my dog, Casey, and we just have a little hill right behind our house where we just go up like 3 times every month. And this is a place where I usually do my homework. I usually pray. I usually just hang out. That's like my special place, just to clear my head. So I just been over while my dog is just running around, shaking his toy. And I said, what is this? Like, why is this here? And my finger runs across this aluminum bar, and it makes a sound, and it just bursts. I go back, because like this stuff just comes out and sprays me, and I cover my face, and then I fall back. There's a bunch of orange on my jacket and on my sweatpants, and it's in my eye, and so whatever it was burning, and so I quickly went to a patch of snow, and I started irrigating my eye and washing my left eye with it. I listened for my dog, and I hear his grunting, so I go, Casey, here. And then he's still just mumbling, and I'm like, Casey, here. And I yell even louder, and then nothing happens, and I just felt my stomach clench. And I sprinted towards Casey, and I fell to my knees, and he was having something like a seizure, and so, yeah. So his eyes are turning glassy, and like this froth is going through his mouth. And he's twisting and turning, and so I thought, if there's any way to save him, I gotta go get help now. And so I didn't want to leave him, but I had to. So I quickly sprinted down the mountain. I say, Mom, hurry, something's wrong with Casey. I call my dad, and I tell him what's happening, and so we went up the hill again, and this is just me and my mom, and Casey's gone by then, and so that was hard to see. I arrived before my mom, because I didn't want to have her see it at first, and so I hear my dad pull up, and he starts yelling, where are you guys? And so I leave my mom with Casey as she's like trying to see what's wrong, seeing if he choked on anything.
I was in complete shock and didn't know what was happening. When I went to give the dog mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, he stopped me. He said, Dad, don't do it, that's poison. You'll die. So, I just think that's an amazing moment, and great moments come out of bad things.
We received a call of a bomb, is what the dispatch stated. When we arrived, along with our bomb crew, we went up, and this dog was dead, and the boy was also covered with this stuff, and as the hazmat was looking at it, we found that it was cyanide gas, and I'm thinking, what the heck is this doing out?
Canyon lived just by the very width of his wrist. Because he heard, maybe it was a frozen spring or whatever, he heard it sliding. We don't know. He jumped back, and when he jumped back, he went like this, and he saw the gas hitting his eyes.
So they either came in from over there, off Antelope, or from here. And I'm now maybe 20 yards from the location of the attempted murder of my child. There's 2 houses there.
Then we started looking at, now, what is this? What's it supposed to be? And we send our detectives to follow up on it. That's when we found out that it was the Department of Agriculture that supervised these things, and that they were actually 18 of them in the county that we weren't aware of.
Wildlife Services is a federal agency, and they run under what's called APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Services, very official title. And specific to what we work on and the issues, Wildlife Services is the agency that goes out on the behalf of ranchers, both on private and public lands throughout the country, and kills predators supposedly to protect livestock. Essentially, they are federal government trappers. Predation on cattle by coyotes is almost non-existent. It's minimal. The cattle ranchers want wolves killed and cougars killed. Sheep ranchers want coyotes killed.
I've served on Homeland Security for more than a decade. Wildlife Services is harder to penetrate than our intelligence services in terms of what they're doing and how they spend their money. And what really goes on is unknown, probably even to the theoretical leaders of the agency in Washington, D.C. It's, shall we say, federalized because it's state by state and agent by agent, really. Some understand and can counsel ranchers and farmers on modern practices that aren't lethal, but others are just out there laying out the traps and riding around in planes and helicopters and shooting whatever they can.
An M44 device is actually a very inconspicuous looking device. It's only about that tall. There's several components to it. There's a pipe that you drive into the ground, and then there's an ejector that you put in on top of that. And in the middle of that, there's a firing pin below the sodium cyanide capsule that's filled with the sodium cyanide. And it's a device that's spring activated. The top of the M44 is wrapped with an absorbent tape. And what the trapper does is they smear on an attractant, and most wild canids are drawn by their noses through the world. And they investigate, and they'll often then reach down on top of the M44 and pull it up. And that's when the firing pin ejects through the sodium cyanide capsule, and the particles within that capsule then disperse up into the animal's mouth and sinuses.
There's really no way to know how much M44 use is going on in a particular area because Wildlife Services will not tell the public where and how many of these devices they're putting out there. And so if you think about it, M44s are basically landmines that are chemical weapons that are there to ambush whatever it is that comes along and trips them. And sometimes that's a target species that they're trying to kill, and sometimes it's someone's dog, and sometimes it's even a cow or a calf. Obviously these M44s are powerful enough to kill an animal that's 250 pounds. And that includes humans. We're in that size range.
Sodium cyanide ejectors, M44s, basically there's use directives for them, and those are through the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. One of the use restrictions is they're supposed to notify local medical facilities. Out of hundreds of calls that I've made over the decades, we never found one case where any medical facility, any fire department, any EMS emergency responders were ever notified that M44s were being used in the area, ever.
We physicians were used to just knowing, and you just do it. You just deal with it right then, but we didn't have any clue. Talked to my good friend, the emergency room physician, and he had no idea. And suddenly, he and I are both searching. He's searching, I'm searching, and we're trying to figure out what to do. Well, when you're talking about cyaniding your child, it's a pretty sad deal that you're having to look it up real time.
I just kept getting like huge migraines, and they were a headache like nothing I've ever had, on a whole new level. Like I wouldn't be able to feel my hands at times, and it was really scary. You're playing games with your friends and you can't feel the control. And yeah, that happened for like a month.
It turned out that this cyanide bomb that almost killed my child and that did kill my dog, it turns out that that factory where they put all these things together is in my own hometown.
That supplies everywhere in the United States. That is the national depot for Wildlife Services poisons, for all their poisons. And it's where they send out M44 cartridges and M44s to other states with Wildlife Services activities.
Very few people in this town knew that existed. Our mayor didn't know. Our sheriff didn't know. No one knew. It was covert. And I understand why. And I understand that it's a very secure building with all sorts of security and wires and cameras, and that's all fine. But the problem is, the minute the chemicals leave that gate, they're no longer secure. You go out and randomly stick something in the ground and walk away. It's too indiscriminate.
There are so many ironies. If there was a place where you would think that they would be following those EPA use directives, it would be Pocatello. So to me, it speaks volumes as to how lawless this agency is.
When I left Wildlife Services and my previous employment, there's all my old files. I took them with me because I knew they would burn them and destroy them, and so I've got everything about wolves since 1987 on every specific pack, every control action, because I was involved in them. And there's files, there's files. These are all files. You can see how they're worn. Wildlife Services, I believe, have gone underground decades ago because of these types of situations. I know former colleagues that I worked with in Wildlife Services, basically they're muzzled. They're not really allowed to talk to anybody. When you go to the trouble of getting a tool like the M44 certified to use, you have to use that tool. If you don't use it, it's going to go away. And there was always tremendous pressure on us, Wildlife Services, to use what the livestock industry has supported and backed. And the livestock industry kept pressure, of course, on our leadership because we had field itineraries and the state director would look at them and go, why isn't so-and-so using M44s? I said, well, you know, he prefers traps or aerial hunting or whatever his specialty was. And the state director said, well, I don't care. You tell them to get out there and set them damn M44s. That's why we got them. You know, we went through all this certification and they're a tool, and by God, we got to be using them. So the state director would get on me to get on the field trappers that I was supervising and make them set them.
My initial thought was that she had found a skunk, and it was kind of the same reaction at first. Lots of froth and flinging her head around and gasping, and so I got closer and I could tell it was something different. It was a nice day. The snows had started to melt. Myself and my wife and my sister-in-law and her husband and her 2 daughters, we decided to take our dogs out in the prairie, let them run around because they've been cooped up for a long time. Hunt for some antler sheds and climb on the rocks, things such as that. Take a lunch and just spend the day out there. So we got out there and we had been out walking around, and I noticed Molly pawing at her face, and so I started walking towards her, and as I did, Abby, we noticed, was also starting to shake her head and paw her face, and he yelled, "It's a coyote trap, it's a coyote trap." And I said, "What is it?" And he goes, I think it's poison. Quick, get him down to the creek. He started to take his dog with him, who was still walking, and my dog Molly had collapsed. So I carried Molly about halfway, and she slipped out and fell. And at that time, my wife had come up to me, and but at that point, she was not breathing anymore. And so we finished carrying her down to the water, and she was gone by the time I got down there. Abby was still alive, and they were rinsing her and trying to get water in her mouth, but she was having a terrible time breathing. And within another matter of minutes, then she was gone as well. So we decided that we probably couldn't carry them out. We were too far from the pickup. So Daniel brought back a couple of shovels, and we dug a grave and left them there. Yeah. Yep.
Have you been back to that grave since?
No. I don't know that I could. Yeah. I saw no signs whatsoever. I saw no signs as we were coming in. Daniel drove back out the next day and said that about 2 miles up the road, there was a sign on one of the fences. I had not seen it. He hadn't seen it either, obviously, or we would not have been there.
You know, the same with posting signs. You have to come in the right gate. There's a lot of sub-entries into fields that the public uses. And so often when the trapper applies the M44 signs, they're at the gate that he comes in, and may be at the gate where you can exit on that particular system. But all these little sub-roads and trails and stock gates that open easily allow all kinds of access from other directions where you're not going to see those signs.
I've obviously seen what signs are supposed to be there. It was supposed to be plainly marked. It was not marked at all. So if it had been there, they certainly didn't check on it to make sure that it was there.
We were a family just living our lives. We're not political. I'm not involved with any groups. I'm just a person living in my community. We're not activists. We apparently are now. But we've just been thrown into this and had to learn about wildlife services and learn about their tactics. And their tactics are cold and heartless. You get, like I said, the same response over and over. All the incidents, all these poor people who have been exposed and had their dogs die, they get the same cold response. They say the same thing over and over and over. Their PR response is that they deeply regret any incidents and they do their best and they're going to review their policies and procedures, and it's an I don't care attitude.
They took my life away. That was working for the county, running heavy equipment, cats and loaders and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed my job, and I felt like I could really do them a good job, and I could outwork a lot of the men there, most of them. But now I can't even hardly change a light bulb in the wall. It's all from this cyanide. They just took everything away from me. I'm almost helpless. I'm about housebound. We was riding our ATVs down on the river going down towards the brick factory. It's kind of a desert country down there. And in the summertime, the sheep herders run the sheep down in there, and they're the ones that put out these cyanide guns, most of them. I'd seen something off to the side that took my eye. I couldn't tell for sure what it was. I went to rub my hand across the top of it to see what it was, and that thing shot out at me, and it covered me with yellow, orangish looking stuff, my face, everything, my shirts. And it was a kind of a bitter taste that got on my lips and stuff. And the longer I was down there, the sicker I got. So finally we headed back to camp. Camp was about 5 miles away. I was stopping every few minutes to throw up. It just made me sick. So we went down to the hospital, and they affirmed that it was cyanide. And they gave me some shots to help my nausea and stuff. And I missed a couple weeks of work because I was so sick. And all the doctors I'd go to and that, they'd say, well, if it's cyanide, you'd be dead. But they didn't know what to do about it, really. So I decided I was going to retire and see if I couldn't get feeling better and stuff. And it just didn't work out for me.
I will view the tape-recorded message from the BLM officer.
Miss Starr, this is Wayne Stevens from BLM calling. I did a little research on that cyanide gun, and we believe it was the animal damage control officer, and I'm not sure exactly who that would be. I think there's one or two of them in the area, and they work for both the federal government and the state. And I also learned that there was some other people that had found in areas where these cyanide guns have been placed with no signage. So that was brought up to our management, and hopefully we can get that remedied in the future. If you have any questions, please give me a call over here at BLF. Again, this is Wayne Stevens, law enforcement officer. We'll talk to you later, I guess. Bye.
We had a case in Utah about 12, 15 years ago where a woman, they were out scouting areas for rock. They had a company where they sold natural minerals and rocks and these types of things. And her dog got into an M44, beautiful German Shepherd. She would take her dog out with her and made her feel safer when she was out alone by herself. And the dog's name was Max, and he was killed by an M44. She immediately went after Wildlife Services, and they immediately went after her. They villainized her. And ultimately, there was a memo from the state director at the time of Wildlife Services in Utah. He's now state director in Texas. Anyhow, he wrote this memo that went to the headquarters in Wildlife Services, suggesting that they not settle on this, that it would set a bad precedent. We call it the despicable memo, and essentially that's where he's saying that it would encourage people to go out, intentionally have their dogs poisoned so they could sue the government.
So this is a USDA facility. We're the National Wildlife Research Center, which is the research branch of Wildlife Services, and our mission is to reduce human-wildlife conflict. Our focus is on tools and technology, whether they are lethal or not, that either will improve their accuracy, so improve in efficacy, and also at the same time, reduce risk to other things, whether that's your pet. A lot of the pushback from lethal tools come from urban areas, but a lot of times when it's their child that gets bit or their dog that gets killed, then it seems to be a different story. But I'd say there has been a shift in society away from lethal tools, and so with that, we are working more and more as an agency on the non-lethal tools and improving those. I think this agency has always shifted to match societal goals. Like flaggery, for instance, I think you saw some out there. So we started out with flaggery because it worked really well for wolves. And actually, one of the ranches was they were in the wolf area, but they had only had coyotes actually kind of maim a newborn calf. And so we put it up there, and the coyotes stayed out until one day the flaggery got messed up by his calf. Coyotes came in, but by then the calves were old enough, and so he was really happy with it for coyote.
There are a handful of ranchers that are out there using things like flaggery, putting out herders with their animals to scare away predators, putting out llamas, putting out guard dogs. These are all ways that you can decrease the vulnerability of your livestock to the native wildlife. That's the minority, however. That's really not a very widespread or pervasive type of practice in the livestock industry.
Well, I'm unaware of any non-lethal attempts by Wildlife Services, at least here in the state of Idaho. I do know they talk about them, and I even noticed now they have some token public gatherings in the summer to talk about non-lethal. But when it comes to push and shove, they will tell you, we are not funded to do non-lethal. And there's recent quotes by the state director of Wildlife Services in Idaho, that says, it doesn't work, or it won't work for long.
The great irony with this is what we've really learned, and this has been over a half century, is that killing coyotes is really futile. It doesn't work. It's very temporary. Coyotes have this incredible ability to basically compensate. There's a family unit, an alpha male and alpha female. Those are the only two animals that typically breed. And that when you take out one of those animals, you have animals within that pack, within that social unit, that are what scientists refer to as socially sterile or behaviorally sterile, that don't breed because the alpha male and alpha female won't let them breed. Well, then all of a sudden the alpha male and alpha female aren't there, or one or the other, and then you have these animals that go, well, we can breed now. So typically where you would have one pair breeding, you kill them, and then you can have several pairs from that pack all of a sudden available to breed.
It's been about $1 billion that have been spent on this program during its duration by the federal government, $1 billion. And during that time, because they're not following biology or any sensibility, the coyote population has tripled despite the $1 billion. Colorado, they fly around in planes, shoot coyotes, costs about $100 a coyote. There's more coyotes now than when animal damage control started these programs. They don't understand pack behavior and what causes dispersion. They've got coyotes now in parts of the country where they haven't seen them for 100 years. It's a really effective program. It's working really well.
In 1998, we had an appropriations amendment that we were working on with Congressman DeFazio, and we passed it. We defunded Wildlife Services through the House for 24 hours. But then the chairman of the House Ag Appropriations Committee, Congressman Joe Skeen of New Mexico, called up for a revote. There was a technicality in the way the appropriations amendment was written.
Unfortunately, very, very rare procedure. The House, when the bill was finished, revoted my amendment, and in the meantime, the Farm Bureau and the livestock people had gone berserk.
They were on the phone, Wildlife Services and his people, nonstop, basically saying that if wildlife services was defunded, rabbit coyotes would be taking over the countryside, cougars would be eating your children, planes would be falling out of the sky. I'm not kidding you. They used every anecdote in the book that the world was going to come to an end without wildlife services.
Back in March, right after there was the incident with Canyon Mansfield in Pocatello, Idaho, Western Watersheds Project and a number of other conservation groups wrote an Administrative Procedures Act petition to Wildlife Services to ban the use of M44s on all land ownerships in Idaho. And much to our surprise, the agency replied that they would cease the use of M44s statewide until further notice, and then notify us if they were going to restart them again. And then, of course, back in July of 2017, they came around to different cities in Idaho and they did a little road show where they were trying to convince the public how safe it was to have these M44s and how responsible their new regulations were going to be and how it was going to make it okay for them to sow these poison landmines all over the place once again.
The first we ever saw their face was at the rallies. We call them rallies, they call them meetings, right? Well, when you try to kill my kid, it's a rally, not a meeting.
One of Wildlife Services' main points with these meetings is to make it seem like the M44s weren't a bomb. And so they did a demonstration of the M44s. And in the demonstration, like, granted, it doesn't look like it's that dangerous of a device, and it wouldn't be if it was filled with, they filled it with like sod or something like that, you know.
I mean, Homeland Security is concerned about this. This is a potential terrorist weapon, and it's in routine use throughout the western United States by a federal agency.
To me, how they portrayed the M44 to the public puts them in danger because they should know how dangerous and how lethal these devices are. Had that cyanide powder mixed with my brother's saliva, he would be dead in 2 minutes, and no hospital could save him.
So in 2016, Wildlife Services killed about 4,000 coyotes, and 53 of those were killed by M44s. Are 53 coyotes worth the life of my brother, the life of my dog, the trauma that this has caused my family? Is it worth it?
No. No.
No, I want you to answer, Todd.
I'm trying. There is no way that I can provide you an adequate answer.
Just try. Try to answer my question, please.
That explains the limited use that we've been using.
But was it worth it? You're not answering my question, and I don't appreciate it. Answer my question.
How much money are you guys making off of this private land? I mean, come on.
No, answer my question, Todd. Why can't you answer my question? It's a simple question. Was it worth it? Answer my question. No, Todd, I'm asking you. Answer my question.
Answer her.
Answer my question.
Hey.
Be a coward.
Well, he's a coward. You're a coward. Answer my question.
Wildlife Services is a government agency which should be answerable to us, the people. And they're not. They're not because they don't listen, they don't respond. I don't think they cared about my dog. I cared about my dog. So apparently it's worth it to them to take chances with a person's life, to hurt people, to kill dogs, and to kill unintended wildlife, right? Those are just casualties.
Todd, if I died that day when it happened, would it have been worth it? Just for...
It's never worth it for a human to be killed in an accident.
Okay, what I said.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
This is as close.
Mark my words.
You're right, we usually have to wait for an accident in the middle of an intersection to get a light. I would hope that that's not the case here. Here we had a boy watch his dog die of poisoning. The boy was also close enough to be exposed to the gas. To me, that should be a red light to say enough is enough.
In the Mansfield's case, it was discovered through a Freedom of Information Act request that Wildlife Services was fined $6,000 for killing the Mansfield's dog and almost killing their child, Kenyon. And that it wasn't the trapper that was fined, it was Wildlife Services. So the irony here is that the American taxpayer paid the fine for Wildlife Services killing a dog and almost killing a child.
I mean, the one thing that I always say about Wildlife Services is, if nothing else, we're regulated, right? I mean, and all of our data are out there. Whereas when you lose that, so there are counties across the United States that have decided to end their contracts with Wildlife Services, and I get it. I mean, you know, you read these negative, controversial stories in the news, and people are like, why are we paying for that? And so I understand why that happens, but then I talked to ranchers in some of those communities. They said, well, we just about once a month get 4 or 5 guys in a truck and we drive around and shoot coyotes. And so they're, you know, I mean, that's kind of sad, because then the county is also touting how they only do non-lethal tools. Well, I mean, driving around truck shooting coyotes is pretty lethal, and it can be pretty dangerous as far as from a human safety standpoint. For the people that don't know there's a truck full of guys running around shooting at things in the dark, it just doesn't seem like the best situation. And how do they know if they're even getting, you know, the right coyotes as far as the ones causing the problems?
People riding around pickup trucks shooting coyotes, it's going on every single day. Coyotes are vermin in many states, especially western United States. So there's no inhibitions on livestock producers or the guy in the camo hat with his rifle laying on the front seat. I mean, these guys drive around, whether it's shooting ground squirrels or shooting coyotes. That aspect is already there.
I know that we have predators. I live where there's predators. I listen to coyotes in my backyard. I kind of like it. If it got real bad, they're predators. We can go out and there is no, we can kill them out here in Idaho if they become a problem. We can kill them. Are they hard to hunt? Yeah, some guys like that, but yeah, they're smart. That's part of their sustainability.
The public needs to be aware there's 2 kinds of predator control applied, and let's use coyote as the example. There's corrective control, which means you have a family of coyotes killing someone's sheep, and you target those particular group of coyotes and kill one or all of them until that problem stops, and then you go on. But Wildlife Services, a huge part of their program is preventative control. Preventative means there's a coyote out in the field. Though it's eating a mouse or a rabbit, it might kill a sheep. Therefore, that coyote needs to be killed. The preventative aspect of the program probably takes the lion's share of coyotes every year. And it's all self-reported through the National Agricultural Statistical Reporting Service. This is all survey. This is all self-reported. This is not science. Let me give you an example. Is the camera still running? Or?
It is.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a few years ago when I was still working for the Fish and Wildlife Service here, there were some sheep killed up north here, and it was 20-some head, and Wildlife Services went in, caught a wolf, put a radio collar on the wolf on a 90-degree day, and of course the wolf died. So the federal agents had to go up there, of course, to look at the dead wolf. But there was 20-some sheep involved in the documentation and the justification to even have Wildlife Services in their trapping. So the federal agents go up on the hill, they find the wolf, and then they phone me from up there and they go, Carter, now I understand that 20-some sheep were killed, right? And I said, yeah, I got the report here, and that's what. Well, they go, we found 1.5 so far. They walked all over that mountain. They documented 1.5 dead sheep. Wildlife Services reports at 20-some dead sheep, because that is what stimulates federal funding, is to show a need for those services.
More effective measures could be taken. Unfortunately, the more effective, more discriminate measures, non-lethal, that could be taken would cost the ranchers a little bit of money. We're talking about basic measures could save more livestock than trying to extirpate predators who are providing huge benefits throughout the ecosystem. It's just, to me, puzzling.
Wildlife Services represents an obsolete and old way of thinking about the world, in which humanity controls everything, manages everything, manipulates everything to our own advantage and best interest. But the fact of the matter is that we're not smart enough, we're not knowledgeable enough, we don't have the tools to run the world in the ways that agencies like Wildlife Services would pretend to run the world.
I know in my career in Montana, we killed cattle, we killed sheep, we killed grizzly bears. Several wolves have been killed in Idaho, Wyoming, Montana area in recent years by M44s. It's just not worth the risk, I don't believe. In today's society, just during my employment since the mid-1970s, the amount of human use on our national forests, our public lands, everywhere you go, it's many-fold more noticeable to me than when I was running around Montana in the 1970s. I couldn't sleep at night if I had an M44 set out anywhere.
My father served in World War II. He knows what cyanide gas is. I took history lessons. I know what cyanide gas is and what it was used for. I don't want to be around it, and I don't want it around my kids or my public.
I had given it some thought, and that's the only thing I could come up with, is that it's just easy, convenient. You go out, you pound a couple things in the ground, and it does your work for you. You don't have to do anything more.
I forgive them, but do what's right. These things are wrong.
I always refer to them as a public landmine. It doesn't matter who you are, no race, color, discrimination, creed, animal, whatever, is all vulnerable to the use of the cyanide weapons that's out on the land, and we would like to just live our life in the U.S. and be safe.
At the very least, if you are going to have all these animals on public lands, and you choose not to protect them with human presence, with guard dogs, with range riders, what have you, and you lose some of that livestock, that's the cost of doing business.
I would absolutely count on it being lifted. It is another one of these withdraw, go quiet, let the dirt and dust and smoke blow over. And if you read the most current ASI report and meeting that was just held, the Undersecretary said basically these are a very valuable tool. In print, it told me clearly that they have every intention of continuing to use the M44.
I feel guilty about it too. I carry a lot of guilt because, you know, I have to work, raise my family, and we got things going, and there's only so much time in the day, and they do this full time against me.
It's not worth a human life. They want to put them out there everywhere to kill a few coyotes for the rich people, the cattlemen and the sheepmen. And they get the use of the land, the federal land, but we can't use it because now we're scared to go camping.
I mean, just face it. You want to subsidize ranching interests, just be honest about it and say, we want to borrow $11 million in the name of the American taxpayers and give it to private ranching interests. That's it, plain and simple, yes or no.
99% of the U.S. society could care less who ASI is. But I read it because it's those lines, those sentences within the story that tell me, the M44, it's not going away. The M44 is going to be promoted and emphasized as a strategic, useful tool.
We're all battle weary. We've been at it a long time, and its progress is very incremental for a myriad of reasons. Up until this point, nobody's been able to do what the Mansfields have done. How they rose to the occasion, and a lot of it has to do with Canyon. He was 14 at the time. He's 15 now, and he's incredibly articulate and thoughtful. And he almost died.
Brooks was a great supporter, and he was like our guide through like Casey and stuff, and he was the one who proposed going to Washington, D.C., and so we just looked at legislators, talked to them, told them this story, and hoping they could support us in a bill to ban these. And I think banning these is a great thing out of respect for my family and out of respect for my dog, like out of respect for Casey. And I think this is just completely absurd that the government is doing this.
It's like the FAA used to be many years ago. They called it the Tombstone Agency. They would make airlines fix things after people were killed in a crash. They were charged with promoting the industry and regulating the industry. I always said that was a conflict, and finally, after a horrible crash, I got that rescinded. Well, we're at the same place here.
You know, here's the deal. Canyon's law is a federal law, and it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be a big battle. But you know, we are our own county, and if we don't want the federal government to put these things on our lands, we shouldn't have to. Our county commissioners in a meeting could say, these things are banned, and we can make it a law. That creates momentum that goes county to county to county, and then state to state to state. And in effect, we don't have to have a name on a law. It just needs to be done.
There needs to be these challenges. There needs to be questions asked. And we got to change with the times.
It's hard, like, like sometimes I call him Casey and stuff. I couldn't ask for anything more, because he's a really great dog. Going on hikes, I've been on a couple, but it's been hard. Like being in the same place and stuff, with a new dog, it's hard. We could have been a family where it happened and we fought for a while, but we could have gone back to our regular lives, and really that would hurt me a lot more than the incident actually happening, because him dying has to be for something. We have to pull something good out of it, or else it's just gonna be something bad and evil's gonna keep going on. And really, I just want, if Casey knew about this, he would want it to, to stop. Like that was our place.
at the end of the driveway, you can hear old Ranger bark, barking at that gang cars go riding in the dark. Ranger, oh Ranger, how far can you go? Old Gary tracks you down and brings you back once more. Rangers and the chickens chasing the neighbor cat, rolling in the field mud, happy as he can get. Ranger, oh Ranger, we ever get away?